Is Davos ready for Donald Trump? In less than 2 weeks, the president is going to march his full economic team into the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. You could say he's walking into the lion's den, except that he's the lion. And the globalists know it. Yesterday, the New York Times shrieked that Donald Trump has set himself above international law. They wrote, on topic after topic, President Trump made clear he would be the arbiter of any limits to his authority, not international law or treaties. But it's not international law they're worried about. It's their entire globalist system. And that is what Trump was actually telling the New York Times. And that is exactly what he's going to tell the gathered so-called international elite at Davos. So in less than 2 weeks, Donald Trump lands in Davos, and he's bringing with him a demolition crew. He's bringing Treasury Secretary Bessent, Commerce Secretary Lutnick, Energy Secretary Wright, Trade Representative Greer, and don't forget Trump's close confidant and diplomat of all trades, Steve Witkoff. Why this group? Because they represent all the elements that are replacing the British liberal free trade system. Lutnick and Greer are going to tell them that the era of sending American manufacturing capacity overseas and gutting our middle and working classes is over. Bessent is there to cut off the capital flows that prioritize global financial income streams over American wages. And Chris Wright, well, he's the walking refutation of the entire insane green agenda. And Steve Witkoff, well, he's the guy who gets things done for Donald Trump. But to really understand what Trump is doing in Davos, you're going to have to understand where Davos comes from. It was started in 1971. That was the year the British Empire dismantled the Bretton Woods financial system. That is the system that had stabilized economies in the post-war world. So the World Economic Forum was launched to begin to manage this post-1971 period. Everyone knows it was created by Klaus Schwab, but he had been mentored by Henry Kissinger at Harvard in the late 1960s. Now, he's already laid down some covering fire before his team heads out, hitting them exactly where it hurts, their networks of soft power. Just 3 days ago, the White House released a new finding withdrawing the United States from 66 international organizations, conventions, and treaty. Marco Rubio made clear they're pulling the plug on what he called a sprawling architecture of global governance, which, as he put it, serves the same elite networks of the multilateral NGO complex. And then Rubio drilled down on what this apparatus really is. He said, from DEA mandates to gender equality campaigns to climate orthodoxy, many international organizations now serve a globalist project rooted in the discredited fantasy of the end of history. These organizations actively seek to constrain American sovereignty. Now, the organizations that the U.S. is withdrawing from include the full gamut of green enforcement institutions that have been set up in the last few decades to enforce the carbon dioxide is poison policy, which is supposed to make nations deindustrialize. Also, some of these institutions that we're withdrawing from go all the way back to the very foundation of the UN in the late 1940s. And if you go back to the early days of the UN, you'll find people like Julian Huxley letting it all hang out as to the British plans for the UN, which, by the way, were contrary to Franklin Roosevelt's intentions. So let's step back and see what Trump has done in just the first 10 days of 2026. He smashed their offshore money laundering operations in the Caribbean. He's withdrawn from 66 transnational organizations and treaties that have been strangling American sovereignty, some since the UN was founded. His Treasury Secretary is now following the money right into the NGOs and the 501c3s that fund the foot soldiers attacking our law enforcement agents on American streets. This is a coordinated strike on every level of the spiderweb, from Davos to Minneapolis. So, sure, the New York Times is screaming that Trump has set himself above international law. Good, because their international law was never law. It was a cage built to keep America trapped inside a system designed by the British Empire and administered by their globalist heirs. Donald Trump is taking a jackhammer to that system.